Welcome to Shit You Wish Your Building Did, the must-watch show for transforming your commercial spaces into smart buildings. Today, we're diving into the world of building retrofits with Stefan Schmidt from Meterz, exploring why it's the smarter, more sustainable choice over new construction. Why are older buildings being left behind in the smart tech revolution, and what does this mean for the future of smart buildings? Join us for this insightful conversation with Stefan. And remember to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with our latest episodes. Ready to transform your building with smart technology? Let's jump right in. Hey, Stefan from Meterz, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, James. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you too. And of course, thanks for coming along and having a discussion today. And we wanted to talk about commercial buildings' silent majority, basically all those buildings that don't get enough attention, the ones that need retrofitting. And I guess I wanted to start today by asking you, about really defining, to define retrofit, because I think it's something that, people think they fully understand. It's one of those words that gets used a lot, but actually it can be different things to different people. I mean, you can talk retrofit, refurbishment, replacement, renovation. What does it mean to you?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's a lot of words, as you say, that get used interchangeably, right? For me, a large refurbishment or retrofit is something where you're significantly altering the fabric of the building. You're exchanging services and doing quite a lot of capital works, but equally you could have a very light retrofit, right? You could be putting some paint on the walls and putting new carpet in and just kind of freshening up the space. It's probably one of the challenges in defining that arena in its own right. As you say, I do think people like to just push things around and say one or the other. For the purpose of today, I reckon we use it as a kind of a large project, where you're taking an old building and you're pulling out quite a lot of systems, replacing a lot of the building fabric, and therefore it is a sort of a significant refurb or a significant retrofit of that asset.
And then, based on that, then what is how should people think about the technology for retrofit? I mean, how is it different? What kind of use cases are preeminent, and what are the different approaches in your opinion?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, the reason that we've all moved into this retrofit arena is because it's become too expensive to build new, right? And that in its own right is off the back of kind of financial pressures, as obvious as that is. The interest rates going up, sort of there being less demand for certain types of buildings, in particular offices. It just means that there's more scrutiny on the technology itself, and fundamentally smart buildings technology has been very expensive. Up until now it's been a new innovation. I think there's a lot of quite hefty subscription contracts that different real estate companies, or even outside of that, enterprise companies that own real estate of some description are currently subscribed to, and fundamentally they require a lot of work and a lot of setup. And we used to do in the previous life, we used to do a lot of integration work and supervise that side of things and look at it, and it does genuinely become very apparent that it's just labor that is required to connect the dots between systems. And for many buildings, it's not really required, right? If I haven't got a BMS system or I've got a very light touch controls technology, I don't necessarily need to pull all the data points out of that. I might just want something which is a little bit simpler. And now kind of with the additional scrutiny, as I said on the financials, I think people are taking a step back and looking at where the ROI really is on some of those technologies, and whether or not, especially in some of these retrofit projects, which are perhaps more financially squeezed, they need to be investing in the creme de la creme, or should be instead focused on some of the core use cases that exist within the building technology space.
Okay, and what would some of those core use cases be?
Well, I mean, I think the standard stuff that's always been in buildings remains relevant, right? I mean, a building is about its people, so there needs to be a decent experience as you move through the space. It needs to be comfortable. It can't be freezing or be filled with dust. So I think those components will remain. Sustainability is also core, right? I mean, energy prices are still really high. There's a lot of investor and regulatory pressure and a lot of building owners and operators to do something to kind of decarbonize. And I think that's why those will remain the sort of the core use cases, and perhaps some of the fancier ones, the difficult ones to put a business case against will fall by the wayside a little bit. I mean, it's interesting. While I was at Wired School before, one of the things that I thought would be really popular with some of the occupiers that we were working with was the occupancy data side.
Yeah, right.
And actually many of them were parking that, because while they'd collected a lot of occupancy data, they didn't necessarily have the best tools in their arsenal to do much about it, right? I mean, if your building's half empty, but you have a lease for the next 10 years,
it's not like
the only thing you can do is cancel your lease, right? And there's probably not that much technology can do to support that or deliver that end outcome. So yeah, I think there's going to be a bit of a whittling out, and perhaps we're already seeing that, right? I think there's a lot of companies that are changing their approach and their marketing to focus back on those real core money generating or money saving use cases that make sense for building owners and operators.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I think that's interesting about, you mentioned this greater scrutiny on technology. Do you think that applies to an extent as well to new construction? I mean, yeah, okay, it's a sort of bigger capital project and budget's allocated for it, but you talk to systems integrators as well, and they do talk about how a lot of costs get engineered out, right, as you get towards completion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, excuse me. I think the large buildings that do exist that have these budgets will go ahead still with quite pervasive technology deployments. I mean, you look around the core cities. Coming back to Wired Score, the Smart Score was deployed in all those major, trophy asset projects because they had the money to go behind it. And actually, if you are developing new, buying all your building control systems off the shelf and getting packages perhaps with certain providers to bring down the cost, it's a lot cheaper to implement that technology than it is if you're retrofitting and you have to do a lot more physical work, to pull new cables or replace existing systems or whatever it is. So yes, the scrutiny applies across the board, I think, and there will always be questions asked about, I think any technology or any feature in any building as to whether or not it's going to drive the valuation of that property or the leases that can be pulled in. But that's probably greater in my mind in retrofits, because I think a lot of those projects are perhaps assets that are at risk of stranding, or in regions where there's less demand for the certain asset that they are. And really just what people are trying to do is keep those buildings afloat, right? They're trying to kind of invest the minimum amount of capital to keep them relevant, and they know that technology is important. Perhaps they're responding to some regulatory requirements on, say, getting the appropriate energy data or something like that, but they're definitely not going to dive into things which are the cherry on top of the cake.
No.
It's just not within their remit to do that, or within their kind of financial capacity or capability.
No, that makes sense, of course. Yeah. And again, on this point of scrutiny with retrofits, I mean, obviously we talked about cost. That's a massive barrier. But are there any other things that you think are causing people to hesitate when they're adopting technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people have been burned, unfortunately, as well is probably the reality. I mean, there's a lot of roadmap selling that's happened over the past few years, in kind of the building technology or property technology space, whatever you want to call it. It has been a little bit Wild Westy. We've seen companies come in, disappear, right? I mean, you look at the WeWork story as kind of this almost North Star to that, right? I mean, it's an absolute roller coaster ride, and then people have been following up, and it's quite interesting, but it is very much property technology, right? Where the kind of the leading thesis is you've got the world's biggest asset class by value, right? And all the investors are looking at that, licking their lips and thinking, well, there's got to be a huge amount of money that can be made here. But the reality is that you have an extremely old, traditional, therefore very fragmented industry that sits underneath that, and fundamentally also just is bricks and mortar, right? If you've sold to every building of your asset type that can use your solution from a technology perspective, you're not going to get hockey stick growth because there's no more bricks and mortar buildings that you can sell your solution to, right? So it's a slightly weird space, and I think the VCs, the founders, probably have to take some responsibility for that as well now, because there's been perhaps a lack of understanding or a bit of vanity entrepreneurship where there's been this crazy focus on growth, which has led to that burning of some customers, which I would maybe haven't received the best service and therefore are pushing back on technology.
Yeah.
as a whole as well, until they are more mature, right? People use that phrase, leading edge, not bleeding edge. And I think a lot of people are trying to fall back to that now, and in a time of greater financial scrutiny as well.
Really interesting point. I totally agree. I mean, do you think that it was just from a lack of kind of understanding of the industry, or like, I guess for want of a better word, like a bit of ignorance that they didn't really want? Like you said, they saw the fact that it was like, it's a huge asset class. It's a massive market. There's lots of potential for disruption, but ignored the other aspects that actually, like, it's really nuanced and not an easy market to disrupt.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it is so complex, right? When I speak to some friends who work in kind of other tech-related fields, or are applying technology to other sectors, and I do really think that that chain, right, between kind of the original building owner, and then excuse me, the property management, facilities management, the consultants, energy brokers, whoever they all are, that then advise that end building owner is just difficult, right? Because it's very, very rare that you're speaking at any point to the person who's actually making the purchasing decision. But the person who's actually making the purchasing decision is so removed from any of the topics that you're trying to provide value against, that they can't even really react to it. And when you have that classic sales mantra, right, around kind of the economic buyer and the champion in a certain situation. And I think in real estate, there's probably 10 champions that are required for any single sale to be made, and that is what makes it so complex. Because if it was straightforward, if the benefit was easily applicable, I will provide you this service or this solution and you will receive return X, it would be easy. But the reality is that we're all going in and saying, well, we'll provide you this, and actually there's 10 different organizations, all with different contracts, that will benefit a little bit from what we're providing. Who should actually pay for it?
Yeah.
It gets weird, right? So yeah, I mean, to answer your question more directly, I think there's a lot of confusion around what actually the industry makeup was, or perhaps a little bit of wishful thinking that could be cracked more easily. This is fun. And then off the back of that, kind of the challenge around sort of vanity entrepreneurship and people perhaps being over their skis.
Yeah. I think obviously, if I was going to be honest as well, that there is this tendency to oversell, which is understandable, right? From the vendor perspective, like you want to, like, maybe a disconnect between, what is doable, like, and what is deliverable, right? Because I think, a lot of the technology, of course, it exists. We can do some great things with AI, but it's then applying that and delivering it and making it work in property. So I think there's some responsibility there to sort of sell the benefits of it better and to the right person. But as you said, like, it's because it's complicated. It's not a sale to one particular stakeholder that does complicate things. Or even sort of like, because technology is so complex that you want to simplify it so everyone can understand it. So using analogies like, oh, well, think of a car, think of some other kind of product, but like it's not a good analogy.
It's so true, and it is. I mean, I was sort of saying there a moment ago. It's so bizarrely difficult to actually allocate any sort of benefit. I mean, using your car analogy, right? I buy petrol to move my car forward, right? Like that. Like that, there's a real easy benefit. There's a return on investment to me buying my petrol, or hopefully in the future charging my car electrically to move my car forward, right? Or I'd be using hydrogen, whatever it is. I buy gas for my building. Even the beneficiary of that gas is distributed, and it's complex, right? I mean, with Meterz, one of the big questions that we're dealing with at the moment is how people apportion heating and cooling in buildings, right? And how we get them that data to do that. And it's really, really difficult. There's a lot of data required if you want to do it accurately, if you want to do it at billing grade, and then there's nuances. If you want to install metering, you have to speak to different teams again to get the right permissions to go on site. You've got to deal with insurances. It's almost comical in some ways how complex the real estate environment makes it. But I really just think that's a function of the way it's organically grown, right? I mean, people say it's one of the oldest professions in the world. And a lot of these organizations that you work with as well have been around for a really long time, and kind of the structures in which they operate have been around for a really long time, and that makes them naturally more difficult to disrupt, because they're just ingrained by nature of their own age.
Yeah. No, I entirely agree. You mentioned your company there, Meterz. I actually pronounced it wrong earlier. Sorry. We'll edit that out, I think. But I mean, you sort of alluded to it there. Tell us more. Like, what are you guys planning, and where are you fitting into this market?
Yeah, so what we're doing is we're removing barriers to analyzing and collecting energy data. So we're effectively going out, and we've recognized that there's a demand for high quality data. People need that to report. They need that to develop their CREM roadmaps and strategies to deliver the decarbonization work, and in many situations or many places now to actually comply with appropriate regulation as well. The problem is that getting that data has been historically challenging for some of the reasons that we spoke about, right? There's difficulties around the fragmentation of kind of who owns the building, who benefits from the data. There's challenges around just getting on site and doing that in a cost-effective way, and probably some challenges also around sort of the established energy metering companies or energy data companies not being pushed very hard. They've kind of existed in a status quo and been able to deliver what I would describe as maybe a bit of a subpar service. At least a lot of the software companies that you speak to will see it that way. So we're going in and we're providing a piece of data pipe, energy data pipe, which can be fed into existing tools and platforms that are already in use by those organizations, right? So if you're using a reporting tool like DeepKey or Vora, or you're working with an optimization company like Demand Logic or Facilio, we'll just push the data there, right? Okay. So we're not trying to give you another dashboard or another tool. We're really almost just like an API company for energy data that's based on a shadow metering solution to get you that data where you need it.
Nice. Okay. And obviously ties into retrofit then, the point of the conversation today, because it's a more cost-effective solution than might what otherwise be available.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's just it. I mean, we can, what I've seen in the market so far is that we're undercutting quotes by 50+%. And we're doing that by working with new IoT solutions that other people aren't working with, right? And kind of being very, very upfront around sort of what the level of granularity you need is versus the level of cost. Because if you're just doing sustainability reporting on your building, you might be happy with plus or minus 1% or 2% on the accuracy. If you're doing billing, you need it to be, on the mark. Right, there's legal requirements and all sorts there. So we're being really actively, we've been actively talking to our first customers now and making sure that they have an understanding of that kind of cost to benefit balance. If you're a great example, I was just up in Crewe actually, which was a nightmare with the trains earlier in the week. They don't need super accurate data on some of the circuits that they want to monitor because they just want to see whether or not they're operating out of hours. Right. So they've been sold these crazy metering packages in the past where people have tried to put in lab tested scientific grade instruments, but actually you're probably happy with something that's, low cost out of the box and can tell you whether or not someone's left the lights on. Right. And I think that's just it. There's not been enough effort made by the existing players in this space to really work and understand, what companies need or what the data requirements are, and then to be able to be flexible enough and react to that as well. I think that's the real challenge.
Great. And we'll put a link in the show notes to the website. But what's the plan for next year?
So we're cracking on. We've got, like I said, we've got our first couple of customers and sort of pilots all signed up, which is awesome. We're wanting to launch in April. Is the plan as things stand. So we're going to push out towards that date. And then kind of crack on. There's a few integrations to some of the software companies underway that I mentioned also, which will be cool. And then hopefully just starting to deliver more of these solutions to more customers so that they can decarbonize effectively.
Good stuff. Excellent. Well, I wish you good luck with it. Just to go back, obviously to where we were before with retrofit. I mean, do you also have advice? I mean, imagine there's also a lot of customers out there who, perhaps can't draw that line between new construction and retrofit. They have a large portfolio of different types of buildings with different building management systems, different technology. What advice would you give them, about retrofit projects, and is it different, or is it the same advice?
You mentioned value engineering earlier on when you started talking about development, right? And I do think value engineering has a really bad reputation, right? People look at value engineering, they kind of, I mean, I used to work in an MEP consultancy, and that was always the big frustration.
Yeah, sure.
At the end of the project, the client value engineer what you've been working on for ages, and I get it, right? I mean, if you've been working on doing a detailed engineering design for a building, and then someone turns around 5 or 6 months later or 2 years later and says, "I don't want it," right? That's annoying, right? And I think that's just the nature of consulting, unfortunately, is that you're never the person that makes the final decision in any case. But it is it's also important, right? Because a lot of what the industry has been talking about for a while now is not doing technology for technology's sake, and I think value engineering is the methodology for avoiding that, right? If you have a bunch of organizations now that are going to buy a huge amount of tech, I mean, I think the classic example are the tenant apps. But buying tenant apps, and off the back of that, they are realizing that maybe they're not seeing the value, or that the customer or the tenant has brought their own app into the space. They're not using it. None of those landlords will buy a tenant app again, because they now think it's not right for them in that situation, and it's always going to get value engineered out. That's not necessarily accurate, right? There are still great use cases for tenant apps. There's still things that they can do, but perhaps because we were too keen, coming back to that hockey stick growth, to push this, what might have not been the right solution or the good solution for the customer into the market, there's now an adversity to that. And they're saying, well, do we really need it? Is it that important? And as we've been talking about retrofits, that's obviously even more pronounced in that kind of environment, right? I mean, the basic use cases in an office building, for example, like desk booking, that's not for the building owner to provide, right? It's for the customer to bring in. I was working on projects nearly 10 years ago where everyone was providing desk booking apps to their to their tenants. So it's just been a little bit of thinning out, I think, and that will continue. And value engineering, in my mind, is actually a useful mechanic to make that happen, to stop people from spending money on things that they don't need, and then off the back of that, hopefully lead to a net better outcome for everyone involved in that product or that kind of solution cycle.
Yeah, it's a good perspective. I hadn't considered it that way before. So yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean,
it's just a bad word.
Yeah, it comes with its own baggage, doesn't it? Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, and probably the people I've talked to are the ones that don't particularly like it. Some of what you talk about as well, I feel like, some of this can be solved by ultimately knowledge, right? Like if I guess that all the technology was a bit more mature and people understood it better, then they would make better decisions. And I wonder if some of that's around use cases, right? Like if there were clearly defined use cases which everyone knew that they were going to get return on investment, then that would make more sense. But I mean, how do you think, as a customer, how do they go navigate that? Do they have to go and speak to somebody, hire a consultant or something, or is it just something that you think they can pick up for themselves now and learn?
I've already thrown shade at tenant apps. I don't want to throw shade at consultants as well. I think the reality for me is that a lot of buildings are quite similar, right? And there's a fine line there. So I mean, to be super clear, actually, office buildings are office buildings. Industrial sheds are industrial sheds. The tenants that exist within those buildings have largely different needs. You would still expect, right? They are their own organization. There's different things that they're trying to do. But from a building operator or owner perspective, what you can do to provide the appropriate infrastructure for them to realize those needs from a technology perspective is kind of similar, right? Like there's not too much variability there. That being said, I think one of the biggest failures of the smart building space, the property technology space so far, has been assuming that there is this silver bullet that you can just apply a solution to any building and run with it, and that isn't true either. Right. I mean, even at a fund level, funds are operated differently. They have different investment priorities and VCs. They will buy solutions on the back of that, not because they also have an office building and the last person that you sold something to also had an office building, right? So I think there's inherent complexity there, but whether or not you as a building owner need to be undertaking kind of deep use case sessions to understand which technology is right for you, I think that phase is starting to go. I speak to very few people now who don't have a basic idea of kind of which data points would be useful for them and therefore which types of technologies would be useful for them. What's probably still more difficult is the procurement side. Because there, if you aren't an expert in software or that kind of field, you might be used to procuring facilities management contracts or something like that. You will probably struggle and end up with what I think a lot of people have now, a lot of overlap in your technology stack, where you have 3 or 4 different platforms that your teams are logging into to look at dashboards where probably you could consolidate that down to 1 or 2, but you're locked in for 3 years. That's just going to be the way that you operate now. And so, yeah, I would say the use case side is more straightforward. And, as I mentioned before, the kind of the security, sustainability, basic user experience, that those things will continue to run in the background. But yeah, the procurement can be more challenging if you're not clued into what's involved and kind of what the pitfalls might be.
Yeah, great point. So I'm going to leave you with one question, Stefan. If there was, just one thing that we've covered today that you want people to take away from the conversation, what would it be?
It's a big question. I think to all the building owners, keep thinking about technology and keep looking at how that's going to support your business. Don't be afraid of it. Even if you have had a bad experience in the past, there's huge value to be had. And the future of buildings, and Ari, our founder at Meterz, used to always say this. I used to think it was really good. Is the future of buildings is that they are smarter and better connected. They will continue to be smarter and better connected, and that's not going away. It's just a fact of life. It's our lives will be defined by that. Overall, from a solutions perspective, I think there's a world now in which we need to really look ourselves, in the mirror and think about what growth is realistic and which use cases are important. The environment is as such that I think a lot of the solutions as they were will not survive. But that's also okay. I think we need to be okay with that as kind of a property technology industry and just say, look, these weren't the right products or these weren't the right services, and we're going to pivot or we're going to refocus and do something slightly differently, message something slightly differently, so that we are still providing value to these building owners, because that value is there. It's to be found. It just needs to be done in the right way. And then as an industry, both the ownership and the operator side and the technology side, I think we can just drive change and make things better, hopefully to decarbonize and improve on climate, make buildings better for users, make sure that our city centers stay alive, and all those kind of knock-on societal positives.
Yeah, those important that we have big trends. Yeah, look, great. It's been awesome talking to you. Thanks for your comments. Thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
No, thank you. It's really nice to be on here. Nice to catch up as well.
Yeah, and of course, thanks for everyone for listening. And we'll be back in the new year with more podcasts. See everybody then. Thanks a lot. Bye for now.